political satire. And sometimes with politics, we just have to laugh, right? So it's a good genre to be involved in. He won the Leacock for the best laid plans early on in his career. And of course, he won it again, and he's won many, many awards. I don't have time to tell you about them all. At Niagara Falls, he was a guest speaker at a conference I was at about 10, 12 years ago, something like that. And I was so impressed with how generous he was with all the people who asked him questions and talked to him and so on. And so what I tell people now is that Terry Fallis is exactly the same when you talk to him one-on-one as he is up here. He's a good person, he's a fun person, and he's a genuine person. I just want to stop there, I think, and welcome Terry. And I'm going to come over here and sit beside him, and I get to ask him questions. After we do this for a while, then John Matsui is going to come up and take questions from you that you will have for Terry. So it's going to be a fun night. I hope you enjoy it. All right. Well, I made up 5,000 questions. Are you okay with that? The first thing I wrote down, and these are in really no particular order. Terry, what's the most important quality for a would-be successful writer to have?
Oh my, how much time do we have? First, since it's my first chance to speak, let me just say thank you for those kind words, and thank you, Ron, and Brenda, and Donna, and John, and others who have put this together. It's really nice to be here. I can't see any of you right now.
Yeah, that's not fair.
The lights are, well, during the Q&A, maybe Ben will turn the lights down, but I'm delighted to be here, and there is a different vibe in the room when you're in a room filled with writers. I think only writers can pick up on that, but I pick up on it all the time. So it's very nice to be here. It's nice to be anywhere after what we've gone through for the last 3 years. Yeah. Nice to be in a room with so many people, although I'm still getting used to wearing pants that don't have an elastic waistband. But I'll survive the night, I hope. But thank you. So, most important quality. I think it's for writers to, as cliche as it sounds, to follow their heart when you're writing. Sometimes, writers get this idea that they ought to pick up on the latest trend and maybe write a vampire novel a few years ago because they were so hot. But unless you have a real connection to vampires, maybe you are a vampire, maybe you know one, it probably isn't going to resonate because it's not really who you are. So I would follow your own instincts, your own passions, your own heart. My first novel, The Best Laid Plans, is a satirical novel of Canadian politics. Nobody in the publishing establishment in their right mind would ever advise a writer to write a satirical novel of Canadian politics. But I just thought I ought to write about something that I cared about, that I knew about, that I understood, and that I had some ideas about. So I didn't write a vampire novel, I wrote that, which is probably why nobody was interested in it in the early going. But if you're passionate about something, you can make anything spring to life on the page, and that's our job as writers, to do that. So follow your heart, don't be tempted by the latest trend and what's hot. Good writing is good writing, and you can write about almost anything and make it come alive.
That's so true. I kind of rearranged my questions a little bit because Terry had a great idea yesterday. Don't you love these people that you're doing something and think everything's all organized and everything, and then all of a sudden he comes up with a new idea? Anyways, the new idea was that we know that a number of you would like to be on his newsletter for sure, and I'm hoping maybe mine too. And so we have a couple of people that are going to hand out sheets. If you would like to be on our newsletters, just put your name on one of those sheets and we will share the sheets, and you will get a newsletter. If you hate them, there is an unsubscribe. So you might as well risk it, okay? Anyhow, I did want to ask Terry, what's the best use of an author newsletter?
Well, that's a good question. I had a blog, and I still have a blog, although I don't blog on it very often anymore, but most of you have probably heard of Substack, which is the sort of the latest newsletter platform that writers seem to be gravitating towards. And I discovered it about a year ago and decided, oh, I should point out that I retired from my day job at the end of March last year. So I had a bit more bandwidth, and I'm now writing full time, which is a dream I've had since my first novel in 2007. It took me 16 years thereafter before I could afford to do that. And that's not because my books are bringing in tons of money. It's because I had saved so assiduously, and I married very well. Well above my station. So I can now write full time, and that's a dream come true. So I thought I should, find another way to connect with my readers, and I started this newsletter, which was weekly, is now moving to every second week as I get started on my 10th novel. And I just think it's another way to bring your readers along for the ride. I, for one, like to know about the author and where they came from and how their own lives connect with the stories that they write. And not everyone is like that, but I'm like that. And I thought, I could write a newsletter and explore different aspects of the writing life, maybe with a bit of a focus on my writing life, because that's the one I know best. And I've had fun with it. It's been lots of fun. And so much has happened in my writerly life in the last 15 years that I have enough material to keep me going at least for another few weeks. So, but it's been fun. I just think it's important to make a connection. And I think your readers, if they get to know you as writers and they like you, your readers will be gentler when they read your next novel. And you're giving them more reasons to read your work, I think. So that's why I started it, and I've had fun doing it.
How has your laid-back, self-deprecating sense of humor helped you in your writing?
Well, it's a self-deprecating sense of humor because I have so much about which to be self-deprecating.
Or to be funny.
Humor, if you are funny, I know so many writers. I've going to festivals across the country, which is so much fun. I've met so many writers who are really funny people, who don't inject one scintilla of humor into their writing. And it always puzzles me, it perplexes me, because it means they have to literally suppress part of their personality when they're writing. And I think we want all of us in our writing, every part of us. So there aren't that many people writing humor, writing funny stories.
But doesn't it matter what kind of writing you're doing?
Yes.
So historical fiction. Tell me how I would put my humor into that.
Well, we didn't invent a sense of humor in the 20th century. They did have humor back then.
Okay, so in the dialogue or something like
in
that.
Dialogue. Yeah, it's easy for me because easier for me because I tend to write in the first person. I don't think you write in the first person.
No, I don't.
So when you're writing in the first person, you've got all that narrative exposition when not much is happening, where the personality of the narrator emerges, and that's where much of the funny comes. Mm-hmm. Now there's humor in the dialogue and in the set pieces and the scenes and that kind of thing, but if you can write humor, there is far less competition in humor writing than there is in romance or historical fiction.
So you're saying that's why you're so successful, because you can write humor and nobody else does?
Well, it may be that I'm only up against a handful of other writers in the country. But I think it's, if you have a sense of humor and you want to write as authentically as possible, it makes sense to let that humor emerge in your writing in an appropriate way and when it fits in the story. Like in the covered wagon battle scene in The Loyalist Daughter?
The Loyalist Wife.
Loyalist Wife?
Yeah.
She was also a daughter.
Yes. I stand corrected.
But, I mean, you wouldn't have humor in that scene, but there are places that you can inject a bit of humor, and the more you do it, I think the better you get at it. You hone your humor writing judgment, and it might just set you apart from the other writers on the bookshelf next to you. So, but it helps if you have a sense of humor. If you don't, I wouldn't try writing humor. But the kind of humor that I have in my novels is just the kind of humor, I'm probably employing now unconsciously, and that I use at the dinner table with the family. It's the same. It's the same thing.
Dialogue, yeah. You're a twin. Is there anything about your personal experience as a twin that has informed your writing?
Well, it helped me with my sixth novel,
You
One Brother
can't
Shy.
remember which number they are, folks.
Sorry, it's the order I have trouble with sometimes. I did write a novel about identical twins who were separated at birth.
Yeah.
And my brother and I were not separated at birth, but I have a special understanding of life as an identical twin, so it was almost inevitable that one day I would write a novel about identical twins, even if they were separated at birth. But I had fun doing that, and I think it was easier for me than for someone who was not an identical twin.
Yeah.
But the other benefit is my twin brother and I are very, very close. I talk to him 2 or 3 times a day. He lives not far from me. We play on the same line in our ball hockey league. He's a very close confidant. So he is often my first reader, and he often has some interesting insights to share about his take on the story that I, having been immersed in the manuscript for months and months, have completely overlooked. Mm-hmm. And he'll find little things that would be obvious to almost any first-time reader, but I hadn't picked up on it. So he's been very supportive.
And the next thing I want to talk about that, write what you know, and you're obviously writing what you know. But I was thinking an addendum to that phrase might be, or look it up. Tell me what you've looked up.
I've looked up lots of things, and some of my novels are set, or at least for portions of them, in far-flung countries that I have never visited. Mm-hmm. Moscow, for one. And I don't know what people did in the age of Google, or before the age of Google. Actually, I do know what they did. It took them a lot longer to write novels.
And carrying a lot more books.
Exactly, and baggage to travel places to do the research. I remember in that same novel, One Brother Shy, I needed to find out at one point if there was a hockey history museum in Moscow. I Googled it. 4 seconds later, I had found the Hockey History Museum in Moscow. I then needed to find, is there a metro station near it? Yes, there is. 8 seconds later, I had found the Pavlosletskaya metro station, which was a half a block away from the Hockey History Museum. Then I needed to find a hotel nearby for the story. I searched hotels on Google with the museum in mind. And I found several hotels. I picked the one that had online cameras in their sort of drive-through drop-off area, their restaurants, their lobby, their rooms, and I used all of that detail in the story.
Yeah.
And it's amazing when you drop a little detail about the hotel room, the color, the way the bar was set up, the way the cars drive through the parking circle. People think you've been there. And many people have said, how long did you spend in Moscow researching that book? And I usually say, about 6 weeks. and I've never been. So detail is your friend when you can't go somewhere. And you used a lot of detail in your novels.
Well, I was just going to say, in my first novel that you mentioned, The Loyalist Wife, I looked up, and I can't remember if I did it online or if I did it in a book or whatever, but I looked up and found out how to skin a raccoon because I really thought I needed to understand what John and Lucy were going through on that farm in the wilds of New York State in 1778. And John was going to leave Lucy and go fight with Butler's Rangers, and he was leaving her to look after the farm. So I looked up, and I don't think I could tell you now. I certainly couldn't teach a class in it, but I knew very well how to skin a raccoon. I didn't write that in the book. I referred to it. But if you look it up and you know how it works, just like you with your city.
Yeah, exactly. I might read that section again. We have a raccoon harassing us at home.
We've had one of those too.
I know, on our roof, it looks right in our bedroom window. And I shoo him away, and he turns away and then turns back. Like he just. So I'm getting a water pistol off of Amazon, and I'm going to start shooting through the screen. But I won't skin him. But no, it's true. The detail makes it, and it makes it believable and credible.
Yeah.
And it's a friend. And how long did it take you to find all that information out? Probably under a minute, cumulatively. Astonishing.
It took me longer to learn how to skin a raccoon.
Yes, I bet.
I was going to ask you if you would tell us that iconic story of how you won your first Leacock medal, and I'm sure many of you have heard it, but won't mind hearing it again. And then what has been the result in your life of winning that well-known prize for the best laid plans?
Well, I'll try to abbreviate the story, although it's hard. I wrote this satirical novel of Canadian politics, I already mentioned. First thing I had ever written of any length. And I sent it around to dozens and dozens of literary agents and publishers in Canada and even in the United States for some reason, spreading my net wide. And then I sat back, and in my wildest dreams, I waited for the feeding frenzy to ensue over my debut blockbuster novel.
And how did that work for you?
Yeah, not so well. I waited and waited. I diligently followed up, and some of you in this room may have had the experience of sending things out and then waiting by the mailbox or your email to hear some kind of a response. And after a year of doing that and diligently following up, I didn't even make a big enough impression on the traditional publishing establishment to generate an automated rejection letter. I didn't get a rejection. I don't have any rejection letters on my wall. I just had a deafening silence. And my wife thought, why don't you just self-publish it and just to be done with it. And there was no evidence to suggest that were I to continue my overtures, anything would change.
And at that time, self-publishing didn't have the same reputation that it does now. I think it's changed quite a lot.
I hope it's changed. Yeah, there certainly was a stigma around self-publishing, which is sort of understandable. The automatic assumption is that the book was not good enough to be published by a traditional publisher, so you paid for it. But I just thought, I just want to get it, sort of close this chapter in my life. So I went ahead and self-published it. I podcast the entire novel chapter by chapter, gave it away for free on iTunes and other podcast directories. This is January 2007. So if you think podcasting is in its infancy now, it was positively embryonic then. And this is before it came out as a book. I hadn't made the final call. We were editing it. We worked on cover design, and I still wasn't sure I was going to send it out, but the response I got from the podcast, people would email me, and frankly, I didn't think there'd be very many people in Canada interested in a satirical novel of Canadian politics, but I was getting emails and comments on my blog from people all around the world who had somehow stumbled upon the podcast. I remember one night, it was a Sunday night, I had just uploaded the half-hour chapter. onto my podcast feed, and it was out. And I was working on a client memo in my day job in my pajamas in our third floor office where I was working. And 45 minutes later or so, I got an email. And it said, "My name is Steve. I'm stuck in a traffic jam here in Shanghai on my way home from work. And I could not have survived the traffic jam had I not downloaded the latest chapter of The Best Laid Plans and listened to it on my way home. I never would have made it without it. When is the next one coming out?" And I'm still sitting in the same chair where I uploaded it 45 minutes earlier. Maybe, on the other side of the world, on the other side of this, the international date line, someone's had a chance to listen to it and email me. That's the power of a high-speed internet connection. So the comments I got helped me to understand that perhaps I had written a novel. Because there's a bit of, the confusion is that many people say, you must have had such faith in your story to push it out like that. That's wrong, I did not. I put it out there to discover whether I had written a novel. I didn't really know. I didn't know whether the characters were believable, whether the story held together, whether it was funny. I just had this faint inkling that it was finished. So when all these podcast comments came in, they were, in my mind, the first unbiased, impartial feedback I ever had on my novel. I didn't believe my brother, my sister-in-law, my wife, who said they loved it, because they loved me. And it's, it's not objective. So with that podcast feedback, I self-published it, and I got my box of 10 copies. That was my author package. Print on demand, these were the only 10 copies in existence. And I'll cut the story short, but I had a book launch at McMaster University, where both people who came bought books. It was a thrill. I had a book launch and signed it. And I got back to my office flushed from my triumphant book signing. And I thought, what am I going to do with these 10 books? The only 10 copies of the book I have. And just on a lark, I went to the website of the Leacock Medal for Humor. And as you all will all know, most literary awards in this country and every other country specifically exclude self-published works from eligibility. You can't send your self-published novel into the Giller Prize or the Governor General's Award. They're not eligible. I assumed the same would be so for the Leacock Medal. I read the eligibility page on the website. No such restriction. Clearly an oversight on their part. And they said they needed $100 from the publisher as the entry fee. I was the publisher. They needed a headshot of the author. I had one on my computer that my brother had taken that was on the book. And they said we need 10 copies of the novel.
And you had 10.
Well, I
No, you didn't anymore.
I did. No, I had 10.
You still had 10.
I had 10. That's all I had. I actually ordered a box of books that I had distributed to bookstores. That's another story on consignment. But I only had this box of 10. And this is going to sound hyperbolic, but it's not. It's the honest truth. If they had required 11 copies or 12 copies, Elaine would be interviewing somebody else here today. I'm convinced. I had exactly 10 copies. I even had the cardboard box. Without the cardboard box, that could have thwarted the whole enterprise. So I packaged it up. I had everything I needed. I put the postage on it from our postage meter at the office. I took it to the reception desk because the letter carrier was coming soon. And then I went back to my office, worked on a client memo for a while, maybe 20 or 30 minutes, and then I got cold feet. I said, you can't send your self-published novel into the Leacock Medal, one of our oldest literary awards. And I rushed out to get it, and it had left like 3 minutes earlier. And were it not for our balky elevators in our building, I would have caught it. But I went down, stopping on every floor. That was the problem. And then I rushed out to the front of the building, and I watched the Canada Post truck do a U-turn on Yonge Street and drive north. And it was done. Okay, so then you can follow on the Leacock website the entries as they come in. And they close on December the 31st every year. And so I would visit the website, every 20 minutes or so, just to see who else was in the run. And by December 15th, there were only about a dozen books listed as entrants, and I could see mine there. Some of the other ones were self-published, and I thought maybe I'd hit a really lean year in humor writing. And then I checked again on New Year's Day after it had closed, and scrolled through 48 books. All the mainstream publishers throw theirs in at the 11th hour. There was Douglas Copeland's novel, The Gum Thief. There was Will Ferguson's new novel, Spanish Fly. Will has, at that point, had won the Leacock Medal twice. He's since won it a third time. Arthur Black's new collection, he was a 3-time winner. I thought, well, that was fun while it lasted, I said to myself. And I didn't give it another thought until March 27th, 2008, at about 11:46:21. I was in Montreal on business. You weren't thinking this was going to take this long, were you?
Oh, well, we'll be here till 10.
Okay. And I was on business. I'd just done a presentation for one of our clients, and I had read in the airport lounge that the Leacock Medal shortlist was to be unveiled that morning at 10:30. And at noon, in our lunch break, had another presentation in the afternoon, I scoured the internet for any news of the shortlist, and there was one lonely little story from the Aurelia Packet and Times. And it makes sense because that's where the Leacock Medal is. So, and it said, Leacock Medal shortlist unveiled. And there was a picture of a man and a woman standing in front of this board, and there were 5 book covers and 5 author headshots on it. This was the shortlist. I hadn't read the article. I just looked at the board. And I had predicted who was going to be on the shortlist. And there was Will Ferguson, there was Douglas Copeland, there was Scott Gardner and his great satire, King John of Canada. I didn't recognize the 4th one. And the last headshot and book cover I saw was in the bottom left corner, and it was my book. And I mean, no offense to anyone who may actually have had a stroke, but I thought I'd had a stroke. I was paralyzed and I couldn't speak, hence the stroke diagnosis. And my colleague, who didn't know what I was doing,
Thought you had a stroke.
well, she said, what's wrong? You just went ashen. And I have no recollection of my response. She claims I lifted a limp finger and waved towards the computer screen. And anyway, I have no memory of the presentation I gave that afternoon. We flew back to Toronto that night. Didn't really need the plane. And there was a message waiting for me from the head of the jury when I got home saying I'd been shortlisted for the Leacock Medal. That landed me a literary agent just on the strength of being shortlisted. I finally landed a literary agent who's still with me all these years later. And then, we still hadn't found a publisher by the time the announcement of the winner came along on April the 30th. My wife and I, Nancy and I, drove to Aurelia for the luncheon. I got to meet another author. I'd never met an author before. Scott Gardner was there. And anyway, at the appointed time, which I think was about 12:47:22, they announced the winner, and they announced my name. And I descended into some other kind of medical stupor. My wife said I was just looking blankly at the back of the room, nodding my head slowly. And this is going to sound like I'm making this up as a storyteller. I'm not. This is the truth. She kicked me under the table and said, "You have to go up there. And you just won the Leacock Medal." And you don't prepare a speech, an acceptance speech for an award you have no expectation of winning. And if you had prepared a formal address, you never would have won the award. Murphy's rule of literary awards would have come in, Murphy's Law. But I found I think I actually have it. I found a business card in my jacket pocket. We'd arrived a little early for the luncheon, about 2 hours early. Didn't want to be late. Yeah, I do have it. And I found this Shoppers Drug Mart business card of a client of mine. Actually, we sat on a board together. This is my Leacock acceptance speech from 2008. And apparently it took me 6.5 minutes to scroll through because somebody filmed it and it's on YouTube. And I look at it once in a while. I don't carry this around as a prop to use in situations like this. And I
Right.
I carry it with me as a constant reminder to me of my extraordinary good fortune. I think very few writers can pinpoint a date, time, and place when they became a writer. But to me, I became a writer on April the 30th, 2008. And we drove home shortly thereafter, and my wife left me in silence for much of the drive home. She knew I was pretty well overwhelmed. I'm not sure why she let me drive. But the first words out of her mouth were about half an hour later when we were just entering Barrie on Highway 400 off Highway 11. And she turned to me and said, they'll write about this in your obituary. I'm not kidding. That's what she said.
You know what? I have to interject here. When I asked you to tell this story, it was this long.
It's grown
It's
over
this
time.
long. I've heard so many new parts to
There
it.
you go. Well, maybe I didn't abbreviate it. But you asked me the impact it had on me. To me, the Leacock Medal gave me my writing life. The Leacock Medal doesn't sell a lot of books. It's not, it didn't make me a bestseller. It just made me feel like I actually was a writer. Canada Reads, I think that's what made me a bestseller, Canada Reads, a couple of years later.
Yeah.
But the Leacock Medal, I haven't missed a Leacock Gala since. Very important to me.
It's funny, it took me 6 years to get my first book out, and I never called myself an author. I called myself a writer. And once I could hold that book up, and I bet some of you can identify with this, once I could hold that book in my hand, then it didn't matter what I said, whether I said I was a writer or an author, but there's this thing in your head, isn't it?
There is. And we all need validation, and we all have self-doubt as writers. If you think I don't have self-doubt, you are wrong. Every novel is a new challenge, and each one's a struggle. It's not that I really enjoy it, but it's not easy. So I have a lot of self-doubt. So when you can get validation from people who don't know you, but just have read your book, that's important to all of us. So enter your stuff in any kind of contest you can find. Because if you win, regardless of what it is, you are an award-winning writer. It's true.
Have you ever had a mentor that played into your writing?
Not many people know this, but John Irving is my mentor.
Oh, well, that's tough.
He doesn't know that. He doesn't know that. But I think of John Irving as my mentor. I really do. He's my favorite novelist. I've read all of his novels, including his latest. And he taught me many things about writing, particularly the power of juxtaposing humor and pathos, and sometimes rubbing them right up against one another, thereby making both emotions more potent and powerful for their proximity. He has me laughing on one paragraph, and then 3 sentences later I have a lump in my throat. And there's real power in that, and I have shamelessly stolen that. And if you've read any of my novels, you'll know that there's often a thread of melancholy or sadness or even tragedy that underlies the fun. And that's John Irving.
You did that with Angus's wife. Tell
Yes.
that.
Well, in my first novel, at the end of each chapter, there's a diary entry from my accidental member of Parliament, Angus McClintock, where he is essentially writing to his wife who died about 6 months before the novel opens. And he is, traveling the grief journey And I wanted to do that. So there can be some really funny stuff happening right there, and then he's writing in the privacy of his own, home, with no one around. He's writing his heartfelt feelings about what it's like to live without the woman he's loved for so long.
It was a really good device. I don't remember a lot of books anymore. When you get white hair, you sort of start to not have your memory stay with you quite as easily. But I always remember that device, if you want to call it that.
Well, some of the most meaningful interactions I've had with readers, and it's probably happened maybe half a dozen times in various parts of the country, but an older woman or an older man will wait until after the talk and the book signing and will approach me, and they will say that they had just lost their spouse about 4 months earlier and they didn't know what they were, how to deal with it. And then somehow they came upon my novel and they read it, and they've started writing letters to theirs. And they cry and I cry, I'm getting choked up talking about it.
Yeah.
So how could anything be more meaningful than to hear a reader tell you that? So
I'm skipping a couple of things here because I think
that's because I'm blathering on too long.
I'm too polite to say that. I wanted to ask you if you could talk to us about your long-time reading group, because I know you wrote about it in one of your blog posts, and I thought that was quite interesting. You've had that for a long time. And to what extent does that group inform or help in your writing career?
Elaine's talking about my book club, and my wife and I have been in the same book club now for almost 30 years. And which, if you do the math, is like 15 years before I ever wrote anything or thought I might even be a writer. And they're a wonderful group of people. Some have left, others have joined, but it's a mainstay of our month. The third Monday in every month we get together. And those of you who are in book clubs may corroborate this, but you end up reading books that you wouldn't pick up in a bookstore. And that's the glory of book clubs, is that it broadens your literary horizons. And I've read some wonderful books that I never would have, that's not for me. And it was for me. So it helps keep my mind open. There are a few other writers in the group, and we talk a lot. They're very good friends, and it's like a safe space, right? It's, when you're a writer, it's not always sweetness and light. If you ever go to Goodreads, you will know that not everyone has the same view of your book. And particularly writing humor, I think there's more diversity in our senses of humor than there is in almost any other emotion. You're writing a thriller novel, you're writing a horror novel, you're writing a romance novel. There's more common ground among readers on what they like in those stories.
Isn't that interesting? I never thought of that.
But humor, like one person's hilarious is another person's cringeworthy.
Yeah.
And the cringeworthy ones like to go on Goodreads.
Yeah. That's a downside of the web, isn't it? That all these people that would never, ever have said anything to you in person.
Right.
They're going to do it on there.
Oh, it happens all the time.
You sometimes mention being friends with iconic writers in your Substack newsletter. It must be some interesting conversations you have when you get together in small groups. Have you ever been shocked by anything they have told you? And you don't have to tell us what it is.
Well, I can tell you, I was really surprised. Just in the last 6 months, I have, believe it or not, I still can't believe I can say this, I've become a bit of a friend with John Irving. I introduced him at the Book Drunkard Festival in Uxbridge. That seemed to go well because he asked if I would interview him on stage, not unlike this, although not nearly as skilled as you are. I interviewed
Can you
him.
tell he writes humor?
I interviewed him at the Badminton Racket Club in Toronto on stage, and then we've had dinner twice together in small groups, and then I drove him home and Janet, his wife, from the Bibliobash in Toronto 2 weeks ago. So, but in that first dinner we had in November, I had no idea about this, but he was a speechwriter for Walter Mondale during the presidential campaign, whenever that was, in the very early 80s. He's very much into politics, and I had never known, I never read it anywhere, and he probably is not happy that I've mentioned it, but he has told other people about it. But that was a shock to me, that he had ridden the bus during a presidential campaign, writing speeches for Mondale and Geraldine Ferraro, who was the vice presidential candidate that year.
Wow. What year was that?
I would say 1980 or 1980, I think, something like that.
Wow.
But that was fascinating.
What's your favorite book that you have written? Is it the one that made you the most money?
No, it's not. It isn't. It's my second favorite. Well, not because of the money. My first novel is probably the one that is, as far as how much I like the story, that's number 2, The Best Laid Plans. But of course, it's number 1 in my heart, because I wouldn't be here with 9 novels under my belt had that one not somehow connected with people. But the one I really love, the storyline, is my third novel, Up and Down.
There you go.
Somebody's read it.
I counted 2.
Maybe 2. Yeah, I don't know, I love the characters in that novel, and it's just one of my favorite stories. I mean, I like them all. But
Excuse me, for those who haven't read Up and Down, just give us a rundown on what the plot is.
Oh, well, again, talking about Write What You Know, the narrator is a guy named David Stewart, and it's set in the Toronto office of a multinational public relations agency based in New York, but in the Toronto office is where David works. And I worked in the Toronto office of a multinational PR agency, New York based, for 8 years. So I know about that world. I tend to write about things that I know about, always striving for authenticity and writing with authority. And his first job, he's just come from working on Parliament Hill for the Minister of Science and Technology. And his first job, first client is NASA in the US. Congress is shutting off the funding tap to NASA because we're bored watching space shuttle launches. And NASA wants to rekindle public interest in the space program so that Congress will not cut off funding and in fact will increase funding. And so David Stewart comes up with the idea of a citizen astronaut lottery, where one American and one Canadian citizen drawn at random gets a chance to fly on the shuttle for a week on the International Space Station, where they'll be trained and are working and doing experiments. And anyway, the head of the New York office is looking for the quintessential Canadian, like a really nice Dudley Do-Right, very polite, says "hey" a lot, has hockey skates on a stick over his shoulder. The winner of the lottery is not really who they were looking for. Maybe I should not tell anymore, but I love that character, the person who won.
I love that character.
Anyway, it's just, I had a lot of fun writing it, and there's actually a death scene in that novel.
So you're big on death.
Well, talking about juxtaposing humor and pathos. The death scene, though, actually was kind of autobiographical. Not my death, but I was there when my mother passed away, and I'm sort of channeling that experience in that scene.
Again.
Write what you know.
Write what you know. I was there.
Yeah. What have you learned along your own writing journey that makes your writing life easier now? Anything, or is it harder because you realize there's a whole bunch more things that you'd like to do?
Well, certainly being now, I don't like the word retired, I've just changed jobs is what I've done. But now that I'm no longer working a day job and cramming my writing in around the edges of a very busy working life, let alone a family life when our kids were younger, I now have the bandwidth to devote to my writing in a way I've never had before. And that is extraordinarily satisfying. So I have learned that you can do it, when I meet someone who says, I'm going to write a novel, but I just don't have time, I nod sympathetically, and in my head I'm going, you actually do have time. You just haven't, your desire has not reached the level that allows you to make the time to
Set
get
up
it
a
done.
schedule so that you every day will do something.
I started a company. We had our own business from which I retired. Still goes on without me, with my name on the door, but I'm not there anymore. I haven't given it a second thought in the last year. But you know, I had 2 young kids, and my wife is a senior civil servant, the deputy minister of education. Like, we couldn't have been 2 busier people around, but my desire to write a novel allowed me to do it while keeping all the other balls in the air and without compromising. So you can do it if you want to, hard enough.
Want to switch gears?
Sure.
Do you see GPT or novels by artificial intelligence replacing authors? Why?
I don't think so. I don't think they will replace it because they do an extraordinary job on many things, but I don't think, if I think about the diary entries that I was writing in that first novel, where Angus was lamenting his wife's passing and the hole that is left in his life, I don't know that they can write that, because that comes from a place of human feeling. So I hope not. I must say I've avoided reading very much about it.